started. Tonight, it is my pleasure to welcome local author Justin Barker in celebration of his debut autobiographical YA novel, Bear Boy, the true life coming of age story of two bears who inspire one boy to stand up for animals, question authority, and discover the power of activism. Joining Justin in conversation tonight is fellow San Francisco author Rachel Serra, author of Warrior Girls: How 25 Young Activists Are Saving the Earth. Justin, congratulations on your book coming out this week. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to pass it on to you.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Wow, Justin, I'm so honored to be here with you. Thanks.
Same. I feel the same way. This is so exciting.
So everyone, who's just joining now, I really want you to know that I could not put down Bear Boy. I love this book so much. I read it in a couple days, which I'm usually a really slow reader. And I was just taking notes and just absolutely blown away. I cried. I cheered you on, Justin, as you rose up for Ursula and Brutus, the two sibling black bears who were kept in horrific zoo conditions near your home where you grew up near Sacramento. I stayed up late just having to know what was going to happen to the bears. And I also had to know what was going to happen to you and how you were going to face the bullying you experienced at school. You took me right back to the 1990s. You took me back to my own struggles with my parents and your own healing as well. So I would just love to jump in kind of from right now. Like, I feel so honored that I got to attend your book event on June 20th, just a few days ago, when you were in conversation with Jane Goodall. So incredible, in New York City. Well, it was online. So I would love to hear, maybe you can start by telling us the story about how you got a postcard from Jane Goodall when you were 14 years old, because I think that kind of sets the tone for Bear Boy.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, that's a good start. I had been working for a few years to help Brutus and Ursula, these two bears that were living in pretty tragic conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, in the 90s, this was pre-email and texting, all the things that we're so used to communicating with these days. And I used to get endless amounts of mail from PETA and from people who were had heard about the story of the bears, people donating money. The mailbox was kind of a source of joy for me at the time, because it was just, I had spent so much of my time isolated in the suburbs in where I lived, and the mailbox was really fun. And so I often I read about it in the book about going and opening the mailbox. And one day I open up the mailbox and there's a postcard with Jane Goodall's picture on it. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Jane Goodall had always been my hero for what she had done for animals. And I flipped the card over, and it's a letter from Dr. Jane. And I really can go back to that very moment of not really believing that Dr. Jane was actually Dr. Jane Goodall.
Yeah.
But she had essentially heard about the story about the bears in some sort of article. And she said, I'm sure your parents are proud. Thank you for what you're doing. And I hope we could meet one day. And that was pretty mind-blowing.
Amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
And so then what did you do? What did you do next? Did you write back to her?
Well, the truth is I was so overwhelmed at the idea that the person who I'd called my hero since I could remember had knew who I was, and then took the time to respond to me. And I actually tucked that postcard away and never did anything until years later, when I got a call randomly. I was a videographer, and I got a the weirdest call late at night. It was like the universe really wanted me to meet Jane Goodall, because I got a call. They were like, oh, the videographer that is filming this event called in sick. Can you show up tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning? And I was like, well, what is it? And it was actually a keynote for Dr. Jane. And I was like, oh my God, this is like amazing. And so anyways, long story short, after the event, I filmed her and I went running with the postcard, because I brought the postcard that she had written me. And she saw it and she's like, Bear Boy?
Amazing.
I've always wondered where you were. You never responded to the postcard. Like, oh my God. She gave me the biggest hug and she's like, it's so glad to meet you finally. So that was very weird experience to like never respond and have the universe kind of force me to meet Jane. It was pretty special.
Yeah. And now you two have stayed connected over the years.
I mean, Dr. Jane is like, I like to say that she's one of the coolest people on earth. That's just given. But one of like the most grassroots activists that has ever lived. Because my story about a letter that I received from Jane isn't unique. She supports young people from all over the world, and you know, getting to know her, we've met over the years a few times. Oftentimes, when she's in the Bay Area, she'll connect, and she does this all over the world. She supports young people. She not only believes in animal rights and in environmentalism, but she really believes in the power of youth, and has been like an amazing advocate for young activists for a long time. And she does it one handwritten letter at a time, one email at a time these days, and that's always blown me away. But she's special.
Well, she must have seen in you just how you were really just alone, just fighting these horrific conditions that these two black bears, Ursula and Brutus, were in. So it's understandable that she really just saw you every day, how you were standing up for these two bears, to find a place, at any place that would be willing to take them for their quality of life. And yeah, and for anybody who's just joining now, Justin, when he was a teenager, came up with this idea that he could find a place for these two bears, Ursula and Brutus. But the catch was that, Justin, you needed to cover the $250,000 cost in order to move these bears to this new space where they would have a better life and more space to live. So maybe you can talk us through, like, you've carried this story inside you for your whole life. Maybe you can tell everybody tonight, like, what finally got you to just sit down and say, I need to write this story down.
You know, it was such a profound experience to go from being like a bullied kid to standing up for animals, and to then having that activism really get thrusted into like the national and international spotlight. That was a big jump to go from struggling to whoa, like, pretty amazing. And so as an adult, it was something that I guess obsessed about. Like, it was often in my head. Like, anytime I met somebody new, I kind of wanted to tell them the story about the bears, because it was such a profound part of my story. And so I just decided, after, I was actually in a yoga retreat, and we were doing a meditation, a death meditation, and essentially we got taken to the last 12 hours of our life. And essentially it said, hey, like, what did you regret? And one of the regrets was never helping another zoo animal. And in that moment, I decided I have to tell this story, to kind of, tell the story and eventually, and with the hopes that this story around Brutus and Ursula will help people kind of get a better glimpse into the tragedy of captivity. And it took 10 years to write. So I was 28, 29 when I started writing the book. And it was a challenge. I would say that like, while like helping Brutus and Ursula was a feat and challenging, this telling their story felt much bigger to me. It took 3 times the amount of time it took me to help the bears to actually tell this story, because it was so personal. There's things in this book that like I would weep over. Like I would be up because I had a full-time job. I'd be up at 4:00 in the morning just writing these chapters, and very emotional to write, to go back to some of the most painful moments in my life, and have to recreate, not even recreate, they're in my head, but like have to like relive them and like document them as an adult was an incredibly emotional experience. So it was quite a journey, the 10 years to bring this book into the world.
Yeah, because not only were you telling the bears' story and their struggle, but your own struggle about coming out in high school. Yes.
Indeed.
And your experience being bullied. And maybe you can say more about that, like what that was like for you, but also to try and remember that and then get it down on the page. Must have been really emotional.
It was something. And it was cathartic too in some ways, because there was parts of, I think it really took me writing this book to fully understand why I chose, or why I felt so much empathy for zoo animals, like why the idea of being constrained in a cage and taunted for most of, that's most of zoo animals' experience, is a lot of, just being on display and nowhere to go. And it really took taking the crafting and development of this story helped me better understand the containment that I had as a young queer not out person who who was constrained by the gender expectations, or the just a lot of social societal expectations about what a boy or young man should be like, was really challenging. So this book really kind of helped me. While it was hard to write, it was also like a kind of a therapeutic. I understood myself better after writing this book. So
yeah, your descriptions that anybody who hasn't read Bear Boy yet, oh my gosh, Justin's descriptions of not only like going through the hallways at Harriet Eddy Middle School, but then also you describe the horrible place where the bears lived, and like this parallel of this struggle. And I'll also want everybody here to know that somehow, this is what blew me away, like somehow you've managed to get in like humor and your own, just there was this like certain lightness that somehow you infused into your writing along the way, so which blew me away. How you did that through dialogue and your descriptions. I love that. I think you mentioned in an interview that that the reason that you wrote this book was, quote, for the next Justin living in the suburbs struggling. And you talked about how when you see engaged young people engaging in social issues, and you really wrote this book to say like, you're going to be okay, we're going to be okay. And I'd love for you to I know you and Dr. Jane chatted about this as well during your conversation. I'd love you to say more about activism and supporting young people who are rising up today, and youth who are really out there creating changes. So maybe you can say more about that.
Of course, like it's really amazing. The young people have always been like leading the way in social justice, environmental justice, animal rights movements. It's And but I think that there's this whole new generation of activists that really inspire me, because I think that when I look online and I see the engagement, you've experienced this firsthand, and you've like chronicled 25 young women who are creating change in the world. But for me, there's this intersectionality that's happening, that's like looking beyond just a single kind of connecting all the dots, like around all of this social change that really needs to happen. And I really feel like we're going to be okay, because there's so many engaged young people, and so many smart young people who are really taking up the fight, and that really inspires me. And I reckon that when I was a young one, I also, there was plenty of young people being engaged, but there's so many people like me who had no idea what activism even was at 12 years old, or that there was a possibility to like create change in the world. So while I hope, like, I don't necessarily need to inspire these engaged activists that are already like creating change in the world, my hope is to really find young folks who haven't discovered activism or discovered the thing that they're really passionate about. And that's what I really hope this book does, is spark something in a reader, because that's what happened for me. Like it only took finding an animal rights book, and not just about animal rights, but about like how to be engaged as a young person. That book made all this possible. So my hope with Bear Boy is, and why I wrote the book, was even in those toughest moments as I was struggling, in the crafting of this book, I really kept thinking about, like, I really had this visual of this young person who is struggling in the world finds Bear Boy and is like, oh, I'm gonna be okay. And hey, like, what in my community can I do to create change? So that's really who I wrote the book for.
Okay. And I know you also mentioned that you also wrote the book for youth who might be struggling with coming out, and your own experience. I mean, that's such a big part of this story, and such a brave part of this story. So I'd love for you to also talk more and tell everyone here more about your own coming out story, and yeah, can you say more too?
Yeah, it's so infused, that story of finding myself and finding the courage to share with the world my identity, was so directly connected to the activism that I was engaged in. Like they were like one and the same in a lot of ways. And the book kind of takes, it's an important element, but it's like a string that kind of follows throughout the book. It's, this book is called Bear Boy, but it is also about me coming out, and the struggles of like coming out, and also interestingly, like coming out again. Like when I was a young person, I came out as, gay, and when I was, I think, 14 or 15. And that's how I identified. And then I moved to San Francisco 15 years ago, and then realized that, oh wow, my identity has changed. Like being in such this diverse place, I was like, oh, I'm actually queer because I'm attracted to all sorts of genders. And so that's also kind of like not a major theme, but also something that I explore. And that was important to me because, I'm a queer man, and I'm married to an amazing woman. And so to be an adult and to be able to kind of share my journey of my identity, that's also something that feels like that's an important element of this book to me too, is just being able to feel like settled into like who I am, and how sexuality and identity like can shift over a lifetime.
Yeah. And I was so excited to see Bear Boy listed on the Lambda site as one of June's most anticipated LGBTQ literature. That was so great to see it on that list.
Yeah, that was really cool to wake up to that.
Yeah. Um, well, yeah, because let's just slide right in. You're talking about your life now. You're married to an incredible woman. I know you two have a child together, and maybe you can say more about what you're working on right now. And you had mentioned before that I think perhaps you still are you still closely research what's going on in zoos.
Yeah, one of the things, I'm here in San Francisco, and San Francisco Zoo is a really terrible zoo.
Mm.
It is a poorly managed zoo, and it
Wow.
has a really, really terrible history.
Mhm.
And like the history goes very far back, but like the most modern history we can look at it, the escape of the tiger that ended up killing a visitor.
Yeah.
I could kind of I could really get into the long list of challenges that we're facing as a city with the state of our zoo. But in 2008, we attempted, with a bunch of activists and I, attempted to transition the zoo to a rescue zoo, because one of the challenges in the zoo industry is that animals, essentially, we see it in the news, you see the baby animals at zoos, like, oh, hey, look at this cute animal that was born, and we don't hear the rest of the story, that those animals get transferred here, there, and everywhere. And essentially, the goal with rescue zoos is to say these animals are going to spend the rest of their lives here. We're not going to participate in this kind of constant breeding, constant transferring of animals. And so that wasn't successful. That was what, 10, 12 years ago that we worked on that. And between now and then, we've seen a really serious issues kind of unfolding at the zoo. And, I'll spare you the details. But essentially, based on just what we see in the news and the events that are become very public, just last year, somebody broke in and stole an endangered lemur. And a wild puma broke into the zoo and killed 2 kangaroos. So that's just last year. So the bare minimum a zoo should be doing is really keeping their animals safe. Making sure that there's not predators or thieves taking their animals. That feels like very low threshold. So anyways, long story short, for the last 2 years, I've been really trying to get documents to better understand what's really happening there. That real kind of we see the tip of the iceberg, and the zoo has battled me every step of the way. And this is kind of I tell this story because I think it's really important that there's so many zoos around the world, and citizens really need to focus on their local zoo because it's a source of often very problematic source in a city there's plenty of things to uncover, which I've learned. But long story short, for the last 2 years, I've been trying to get documents and a judicial body of the Board of Supervisors, which was the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force, just sided with me and said that the San Francisco Zoo is both in violation of city, state law and in violation of their lease agreement with the city.
Wow.
And is just forwarding the issue to the mayor and the Board of Supervisors. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm really it's been quite a 2-year journey to just try to get the documents. And my hope is that with that information, we're able to really start a campaign to transition this zoo because what's happening right now is not sustainable. we're a city, the Bay Area, and San Francisco is the city of the saint of animals. So we really should have the like most amazing zoo on the planet, and it's really the opposite. So that's what I've been working on, and
yeah, I wanted to ask you, even as you're talking, I'm closest to the Oakland Zoo, and I actually like grew up as a kid like going to the Oakland Zoo, and I know they have made like a lot of changes. Like my memory as a kid is like these super small cages, but what can we do? What can we do as like you had said, like in your own community, your own local zoo? Like what can I do as a person? I mean, most families I know who have young kids, it's like one of the first things they do, they get a zoo membership. What would
right.
you suggest that?
To be honest, I have a 2-year-old son. I'm choosing not to take
Yeah,
Noah to the zoo because that's not how I want him to experience wildlife.
yeah,
That's like my choice as a dad to not take him to the zoo. But I will say here in the Bay Area, if you are going to make a choice and you're choosing to take your young ones to the zoo, that the Oakland Zoo is the place to go,
oh wow, okay. There's
because
so much space there that
the Oakland zoos,
Mhm.
good zoos come down to good directors, and Oakland Zoo has one of the most progressive zoo directors on
Wow,
earth, frankly. And animal welfare is very at the top of his agenda, and like he has, I think Joel and I might be able to debate the details of like captivity. We probably wouldn't see eye to eye on captivity, but I certainly admire him
yeah.
for what he's done with the constraints of
Mhm.
keeping animals in captivity. So so that was the first thing I would say, is that if you're going to choose to go to the zoo in Bay Area, make an effort and go to the Oakland Zoo. That's supporting a much better zoo than San Francisco. And in general, I think if you're going to go to the zoo, like it's important to have a dialogue about like the realities. These most of the animals that we experience in captivity, like their basic needs can't be met in captivity.
Right.
And so like actually having that dialogue, and actually I think that that's really important, is to really explore with kids like, hey, like here's the realities, like this is not ideal, and just be reflective about the choice, like why are we choosing to do this. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
It really does.
yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, I'm wondering if there's anything else that you would like to add that I haven't asked you about. I know when you and I have briefly chatted about writing, about um, your parents' response to the book. Is there anything else that I haven't asked yet that you'd like to jump in to make sure that everyone knows?
I mean, honestly, I'm kind of want to flip it, and I'm curious about like your book. Like you like have such a unique you had such a unique opportunity to talk to 25 young activists. Like I really am curious what you have learned. What's the through line? Like what actually creates change in the world? Like what was your experience connecting with young activists?
Yeah, I think that's why, of course, I just like pivot right back to you. I think that's why, like, I, as a kid, I also having grown up in the suburbs in Northern California, and I was an activist. I was like a super, super shy kid, but yet I would find places to speak out, and like I would like do things like go and find other adults to volunteer with. Like I used to, as soon as I got my driver's license, I started going out to the Concord Naval Weapons Station to protest arms shipments
Oh,
uh,
wow.
to Central America. And my yeah, my parents were like terrified, but I was one of those super sensitive kids who felt in my heart, like I know, like I'm like, could just, as a little girl, could just see like, why are we waging war? Why do we put people in prison? Just, I really think kids just really see things as they are. Why would we hurt people? Why would we Even my third grader now has asked me, like, when kids say mean things to each other and kids have said mean things and teased her, she says, why would anyone say a mean thing to another kid? It's like we get it in our hearts. I think really all kids do. I think we're born like with the capability to love.
Mm.
So, but somehow I feel like with life in school, I was definitely feeling this. I would, even when I became a mom, I'd bring my daughters to protests, but yet I still kept feeling like I wanted to do more. So when I started seeing youth around the world, I mean, definitely it was like Greta Thunberg was the first activist who I started noticing in the news, just doing like how you did as a teenager, just raising your voice, speaking up. Adults would say, oh, just quiet down, but no. It really reminded me of who I was as a girl and the power that young people have and just this fearlessness. So yeah, I just decided I was going to interview girls and young women from all over the world who were standing up for their futures. What I realized in writing the book is like, the earth actually is going to be okay. I mean, the earth is incredible the way the earth is able to thrive, but we as humans and living beings and animals, what we as humans are doing to the earth, like we're not going to be okay. Animals aren't going to be okay. And the power that, like, as you've talked about, like deciding to become vegan, vegetarian, like we have so many personal actions we can make in our lives, but these young people reminded me that we can make so many huge changes by voting in leaders, by going to companies, corporations, like you were saying, who runs the zoos, who runs these companies, and we can speak up to make these big changes by deciding like who we're going to vote into office.
Mm.
So I learned so much by interviewing these girls and young women, and it reminded me of who I was and who I still am, and it just really motivated me to keep changing, to keep speaking up. So yeah,
That's amazing.
yeah,
I mean, I have to like, it's interesting to like reflect on like how like I obviously I'm a man, I'm a white cisgender man, like, but I've been kind of blown away both in the process of writing this book, like essentially like the women this is like I wrote this book, my title's on this book, but the number of women and young girls who have like made this book possible is kind of blows my mind.
mhm,
Like that my book coach, you know, helped me, and like my wife like helped me write things, and all the journalists have predominantly been women. And to see to see all the young girls who've like read this book and like messaged me, like
mhm.
it's like 98% women
Yeah,
who have like helped make this book possible.
yeah,
And I just have to like honor that, because I really and that's why I was so excited to have you join this, because like I really believe that like women and girls are like our future and will lead like the movements for change.
yeah.
And like in my experience, I don't know, I just am really,
Wow.
I really am moved by like, and I don't even think I've like honored that enough in this book. Like I think now is like the first time that I've been able to honor like how Bear Boy was powered by like some really amazing women, and then now like readers too. It's really fantastic. Like
Yeah.
it's
I know
really
you're
noticeable and touching
reminding
to
me
me.
I had totally forgotten that you're reminding me of like all the women who called you and gave you advice and coached you through when you really felt like, I'm stuck. I don't know what else to do. And there were all these women from different organizations with like, Justin, let me tell you what to do. Let me tell you who to talk to. You can do this. They were like really cheering you on.
I mean, Jane Goodall, like every single person, like all of my mentors were women, like it's like, I really hope that I communicate, like I hope that, my therapist was like, there's so many like people in this story that made this story possible now, who's like helping me thrust this story into the world. It's really something.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Thanks. And I know you've talked about a little bit about your mom. For me, reading this book, like seeing your mom's journey, like at first it seems like she didn't quite understand, like, what are you doing? And you're spending all this money and the phone bills and all this time. And then to see your journey with your mom, how you two came to this understanding and how much she supported you, and really listened to you. To me, I just got so emotional reading those scenes.
Yeah, it's so interesting to like write a memoir, a book that's so personal,
Mhm.
because like I couldn't have strayed away from like the challenges that I faced, my mom and I faced, because
Yeah.
those are real. I do think it's like, as a mom, to have to read through, like I think it's easier, you read the whole book, you get a narrative arc. But I think that as like my mom reading through this book, I think it's hard to have to relive like maybe some of the most like embarrassing things you've done as a mom,
Yeah.
like you hope that like people just like forget about, like, I don't know, as a dad, like I hope that my son just like forgets about my flaws or those tough moments, and so I'm so happy to hear that, like, I always was curious how moms would receive this, because it certainly is like it's not always easy, our journey, my mom and I's journey.
Yeah.
But I hoped it landed in a place that felt like
It was really healing, it seemed. You
mm,
wrote such a healing, to show your healing journey with both of your parents.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah, it was pretty special.
Well, I know, I think possibly Hannah was going to jump in and share if there were some questions.
Yeah. I mean, I really enjoyed listening to your conversation, and I was writing questions down and crossing them off as you answered them throughout. So, wow, thank you so much. That was a wonderful conversation. And I just want to jump right in, kind of on the same feed that you were already on. You're both parents, and you were just talking about your relationship with your mother and your father, and how that you portrayed it in the books. Do you have any advice for parents of young activists or young people who are starting to see the world as it is and want to be more involved, or might have that need to be more involved?
That's such a good question.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Justin. Yeah.
I mean, my hope as a dad is that like we have I feel like I have a duty to like do my own activism, to be an activist myself, to like show him the things that I'm passionate about in the world and how I'm engaged. And I don't necessarily need him to be engaged in the same things that I love. Like I believe in animal rights and a lot of things. I, believe that Black Lives Matter, and I believe in like, environmental justice, a lot of things that I'm passionate about. But I just hope that he sees that passion and finds what he's passionate about. And I think that like my parents were never animal rights activists. They were sensitive, kind people that cared about helping their fellow humans, and so I think I definitely learned a lot from them. But it's not always easy having like rebellious kids who like have strong beliefs. But I really like want to support my son and always have to find it in myself to be like, oh, right, like these strong opinions about things are like what are going to create change in the world. So I don't know. What do you think, Rachel?
Yeah, I was also going to add, like, there's the importance of speaking up for others, or if you see anybody or any living being who's an animal who's struggling, like speaking up. And that was what another thing that really struck me about Bear Boy, because you had something in you, you just had to speak up. Like, you could have gone under the radar and like been like just this quiet kid, like, and gone into a corner, but you really, really spoke up. You're like, you, and I really, as a parent, want my children to speak up if they see anybody harming any other like living being, or to speak up, get support, like their allies, like get other adults to come and help. Yeah, don't turn your head, don't be quiet. Like, it's and I've tried to, like you said, just like I've tried to model for my children, seeing me speak up even if I'm scared.
Those are great answers. I was going to ask, this might be kind of like a not a necessary question, but we are talking about youth activists. But what about those of us who are, you know, a little bit older and maybe just discovering like, oh, you know, I can't be quiet anymore. I need to get out there. What is some of your advice for just taking that first step? I know you talked a little bit about like starting local. So for those of us who can vote, who can get out and be more active and don't have the limitation of not being 18 or plus or whatever it needs to be to start our voting or having our voice in that way, what's your advice for getting started?
I mean, I would say that there's all sorts of ways to be engaged. And like for me, the very first step that I took when I discovered animal rights was to go vegetarian and now vegan. So I do think there's like a lot of things that people can do in their personal lives that are just personal choices every day that can have a really big impact. And I know it's cliche to be like, turn off the water and recycle and, you know, like get a Prius or whatever, you know, like, but I do think that all of the personal choices that we all make like really add up. And that's like one thing my mom I really instilled in me was like, I think the reference I think was like throwing a banana peel out. And like while it biodegrades out in the wild, you know, if you just throw it out the window, if everyone did that, if everyone threw out their banana peels, or if everyone picked the poppies, then like where would we end up? And that kind of really resonates with me. We don't really think that our personal choices actually make an impact, but they do. So there's a lot of that's I think like the very first kind of baseline for me is personal choices. That's easy activism. And I think that like local engagement is, you know, just like showing up to meetings, like I was talking about the San Francisco Zoo, and you know the city of San Francisco and the zoo have a monthly meeting, and I just started showing up to those meetings to get a real sense of what was going on. And so I think that even just like local engagement, I think like showing up to like council meetings, there's so much you can do on a local level that I think is really powerful. And then just like decide, like how I've always conceptualized things was like, what are the big things that I'm passionate about, but then what can I do locally to like create a change? And like back to the zoo reference, like I want to create change in like all of the zoo industry, but I could really have to start at home and focus on San Francisco Zoo. Because that's what's sustainable, especially with a 2-year-old and a full-time job, and you know the book and all these things. Like it's like the local is the sustainable thing to do. And so, what are you passionate about, and how do you find the local issue, like that local angle to a global issue? So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, I would say also, yeah, on that note, one, Hannah, you said vote. I vote, vote, vote. Yeah, if you're an adult who can vote, you can make so many big changes by voting in new leaders, new administrators. So that's huge, and it makes such a big difference. And then I would add, yeah, to Justin what you said, but talk to people. As far as I find it the most difficult to talk to my conservative family members, but I have been really, it's so much easier for me to just avoid them and not interact. And then in this last administration, I just decided I'm going to make an effort and really have these hard conversations. And even Justin, I'll say, even just last week, mom who I was just chatting with and we had just met, she mentioned to me that she was going to take her daughter to the San Francisco Zoo over the summer. Said, oh, we haven't been there in so long. And I said to her, you might want to research more about what goes on at that zoo, because I don't think animals are treated very well. And she was, really? And I tried to say it in a really nice way and I'm like, I know, it's so great to see the animals, but I was just trying to encourage. I thought I could have been just quiet, but she said, I had no idea. And I said, I'm going to do more research because I actually don't know what's going on in the zoo either. And it was just like, it felt a little scary and I didn't want to hurt her feelings. But I also feel like it's so important to just speak up and talk to other people, like you said, in our communities. Yeah.
You never know when you might just send somebody in a better, different path just because they didn't think about it.
Yeah.
Didn't know to think about it. Like I have actually never been to the San Francisco Zoo. I've lived here 8 years now, and I keep thinking, man, I should go. But I have heard much better things about the Oakland Zoo, which is where I just moved. So, but that leads me to my next question, which is, you mentioned, Justin, that you were making a choice not to take Noah to zoos. So for parents who want to introduce their children to wildlife, and yes, you said have the conversation. If you are going to take them to zoos, consider having the conversation. What other types of places do you suggest taking them to have that experience of possibly seeing wildlife in their habitat, or learn more about the wildlife that we may lose if we don't act faster? Absolutely.
It's funny, I was messaging my book coach who helped me write this, and she's like, I think you need to write the 101 things to do instead of going to the zoo.
Yeah.
That's one of my other questions, is what you're working on next. So make a list.
I'm not working on that book right now, but I like the concept of that book. But I think when I think of like I think about like San Francisco, like with the pandemic, things are a little funny, but there's the Marine Mammal Rescue Center that is a great place to go. They are like actively like rehabilitating animals, and so there's places like that you can support. There's farm sanctuaries. There's Sweet Farm down in Half Moon Bay, and so like there's ways to like have firsthand experience with animals that the intentions are there to like really instill respect for animals, and so I would say that. And then screen time, too much screen time. But I think that there's amazing documentaries. My son's really obsessed with birds right now, and there's this like birds a birds documentary on Netflix that he's really into. There's I don't know if you've experienced this, but the grizzly cam in Alaska, the live grizzly cam is like out of this world. So I think that there's like a lot of ways to do it. But I think like to your point, Rachel, like I think understanding your zoo, like there's a lot of like greenwashing that goes on, and a lot of what's really going on there. And Oakland's like if I had to rank zoos, I would say Oakland's actually a good zoo to take your kids to, because that the management is like has good intentions and is making an effort, and it's just not the case at San Francisco Zoo. So you need to work on that book, so I have a better answer for you. But those are a few things that kind of come up to me in my mind.
I love that book. Yeah. I was going to hiking too, or just going outside anywhere in the Bay Area. Like when I go to Tilden, I almost always see animals. Like I was just hiking there and like two little bunnies like hopped across the path. And the deer, I mean, unfortunately, I think this is kind of sad. And so, but I've seen so many coyotes there in the last year, like literally just crossing the path. I mean, I think they're really hungry, but it is amazing just spending a couple hours outside, in where we live in Northern California. It's incredible, but there are just so many animals around here.
It's true. The elephant seals that we went and
Yes.
saw elephant
Oh,
seals
gosh.
recently.
Yeah.
And I think it's like, that's what I like you bring up such a good point, because like happening upon an animal is like how it would naturally be. Like
Mhm.
seeing a deer, like there's something exciting because it's like, oh, that's how like I want my son to experience nature, because that's real life. It's like,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
All great answers. I have one more question that is not writing related, and then I'll get into some writing questions. But this one, you mentioned Jane Goodall and as being your inspiration, and we also mentioned Greta. Is there anyone else on your watch list, or someone that you may not get the same write-up that you think we should all be paying attention to and listening to, and supporting?
I mean, there's two activists that come to mind for me. There's Genesis Butler, who's like a young animal rights activist who's also kind of she's focusing on animal agriculture and both the impact on the animals and the environment. So I would say she's really cool, and she's like on the rise. I think she's 14. Genesis Butler, very cool. And then I've just been noticing lately David Hogue, who is emerged from Florida after this horrific, realities of school shootings. He's like, I don't know if you follow him on Instagram, but he's like at the Capitol, like as a young person, kind of thrusted into activism. Is doing so many like amazing things and is really fighting for gun control. So it's really cool to see. I mean, it's heartbreaking and cool to see that there's like those events have created leaders in the gun control movement. So those are kind of two people that come to mind. Oh my God, Rachel, you probably have like 50 people to talk about.
At least 25.
I'll throw out right now, because they're doing so much of the Sunrise Movement. So the young people who are part of the Sunrise Movement and the Green New Deal, they actually are on their way to DC right now to try and get a meeting with Biden to say, like, please, like, our futures, we need to make radical changes in the way that we make energy. We need to create new jobs for clean energy. So they have been, if you just look up Sunrise Movement on social media, they have been marching. They just, the California group marched from Paradise and across the Golden Gate Bridge a couple of weeks ago. And now they've moved on to DC. And yeah, they're doing incredible work.
Perfect. Thank you. I know Heidi's working hard to get all those people and groups in the chat for everyone to reference. And so now I'm going to kind of switch. We're running short on time here, but I thought it was really important. I'm curious, Justin, I think I called it in my introduction an autobiographical novel. I know when you first approached me, I had like a little bit, I was like, is it a memoir or is it a novel? Or is it, do you consider it a memoir? You said at one point that it was a memoir. And if so, what was your process for deciding not to make it, or not to fictionalize it, to make it about you and have your name in it and your true story, versus making it a fiction story?
Well, yeah, it's funny. I don't call it a memoir, like in general. Like I haven't described it as a memoir, but it has all the trappings of a memoir. It's
Yeah,
all
okay.
true. It's all based on, like, and I think I wrote at the beginning, kind of talking about some names have changed, so people that I had opinions about wouldn't sue me, but everything was real in it, and all of the dialogue was best of my ability. Luckily, in this story, there was news articles. I was able to reference so many news articles that still exist. I have a pile of news articles, and even all the letters. So there was so much like good source material that I was able to, like, I didn't remember the dates of the events. So I had all this source material to be actually like to write kind of a true story. And I just thought it was important. It's so, I mean, as a filmmaker, like I've done documentaries, like real life is like kind of often more amazing than fiction. And so I decided to tell this story because it was the one that I obsessed about and it was in my head. But hopefully I hope to one day write more fictionalized young children's books, without like being too like overt about the challenges of captivity, but like kind of talk about the compassion for animals and so that's one thing I'd like to, like, the next story. People are like, oh, you should write Bear Boy as a picture book, and I think Bear Boy, that story is done. But I would love to do more fictional work in this space.
Very good. Well, that leads me to my next and final question, which is, what are you working on now? And is it something that you can talk about?
Well, this book, just bringing this book into the world feels like a lot.
Yeah, it is a huge accomplishment. I'm very proud.
But I'm working on that, but then also later in the summer, I'm going to be launching a new website specifically around the San Francisco Zoo with all this work that I've been doing. So now that the book's in the world, I really want to start focusing on creating change at the San Francisco Zoo. So that's my focus, is like creating like a source of information for people. So they don't have to do their own research. They can kind of just go to one place and get a sense of things. And start a dialogue around that. Change the San Francisco Zoo is next on my agenda. And then once that kind of gets rolling, like more books in this space is my hope.
Yeah. What about you, Rachel? Do you have anything else in the pipeline, whether it's a book or just next project?
Yeah, I'm currently working on another book for Chicago Review Press. This one's young adult nonfiction. So in a similar vein, I've been interviewing women climate leaders from around the world. So these are women who have been working around the climate crisis for quite a while. Like they're in policy, climate scientists, disruptors, and academics. And so it's been incredible. So I'm writing their stories. And so this book is for readers who are ages like 12 to 17. So I'm going to be doing a lot of writing this summer to work on this. And yeah, and I was going to say, Justin, own the memoir, because it's just, this story is incredible. And like, yeah, I think, and it's you, and it's so real. So yes.
Hey, Rachel, I'm excited to hear that you have another book in the pipeline. I think I saw a news source, but I was like, was that a reference to the other book? But yay, that's so cool.
Yeah, very exciting. Well, keep us posted, Justin, on your website. Let me know. And Rachel, of course, when the book comes out, let us know. Thank you, Justin and Rachel, for joining us tonight. Thank you for choosing BooksInc as one of your host stores for your launch week. Congratulations. I look forward to seeing you around at our stores and at events, future events. Thank you for this conversation. I think it was really important. I'm so glad that we had it. And I will be sending an email to all of our attendees with a special BooksInc coupon. Justin and Rachel's books will both be available on our website with a 15% discount for the next week. I will send you all the information so you don't have to remember that. Justin will be signing copies at our Laurel Village store later this week. And I know we have signed copies from Rachel at our Opera Plaza location. So if you would like signed copies while supplies last, we should have some. We do ship nationwide into Canada if you'd like to gift either of their books, if you already bought your own. And again, thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful, wonderful night. And congratulations again, Justin.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
It means a lot. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Thanks.